Hi, welcome back to my channel for a long overdue recent reads. I've been away for a little while, so I thought I would start back up by talking about some of the books I've read in the past couple of months, and of course a reading journal update. I hope to be back to uploading weekly from now on, but for this video we're catching up on my recent reads from March to May, starting with Sweet Bean Paste. I started off March with a long emotional hug in the form of a book. Sweet Bean Paste is a slice of life, slow-moving Japanese novel set in Tokyo. Sentaro works in a dorayaki shop. He is a former convict and he works there to pay off his debt to the owner who offered him the job when he came out of prison. Toke, a woman in her 70s, comes by the shop and starts interacting with Sentaro, indicating that she would like to work there. This being a 70-year-old woman, he is of course reluctant to make her do manual labor, but she is persistent and she makes amazing bean paste which goes into dorayaki, so eventually Sentaro agrees and lets her make the bean paste for the pancakes. And so we follow along as Toke starts to teach him how to make the bean paste, and their personal stories and backgrounds are revealed. This book is so very wholesome. It has this central message that every life, every person has so much worth just for being. It also just tells a beautiful story about the power of friendship and kindness. It's also quite informative about society and prejudice in particular. A few things that I really loved is that the characters in the story felt so authentic. While it was really wholesome and almost fairy tale-like, the story was believable and complex, that it felt like an authentic stories with characters that had depth. Another thing I loved is the writing that brings out the beauty of the mundane, simple things or scenes that you just end up mesmerized over. Beautiful prose that is simple yet captivating, so I really enjoyed this book. A fair warning that while it is in a way a very comforting book full of hope, it does touch on a lot of serious and emotional topics. It's definitely not just a light read, and in particular some trigger warnings of suicidal thoughts and attempts. For the spread, I started by making a small watercolor painting of a cherry blossom tree. It's such a key image in this story. I left some space under it to write a title, and before sticking it onto my journal, I also wanted to capture the way the story highlights the wonders of the mundane, and so I drew these electric power lines with some birds on it as a background. I stick the cherry tree on the left side, and then for the right side I cut out a frame in pink paper, and then inside wrote the first line of the book and a short review. Next, I read How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division, an essay by Elif Shafak. I really enjoy her writing, which is why I picked this up. I would say it was an enjoyable read, but nothing groundbreaking was said, so I'm not sure it's worth purchasing a physical copy, but I did enjoy hearing her thoughts on pluralism and connecting it to writing and storytelling. There were also some nice anecdotes, and you can really just tell how Elif Shafak is just a good storyteller. I think this book gives a relatively straightforward framework to process some of the heavy topics that everyone is faced with in the news these days. That being said, I don't agree with everything that's said, and I think some things were perhaps oversimplified, and at times I thought she kind of overgeneralized her readers a little bit. But the author is a political scientist, so she obviously is very well read in this area, and it's apparent from this essay that she does have the theoretical background to write on these types of topics. So I think it's a very accessible read on current affairs. So overall, I don't think I would recommend getting a physical copy, but she's a great writer and storyteller, so it's easy to enjoy this piece of writing also. For the spread, I went with purple and brown colors. For the left side, I cut out a large archway shape. I wrote out a leaf shafak vertically on the left side. I also cut out some small round shapes in different shades of purple and brown. I used a small brown greeting card on which I wrote the title, and then I also used some scraps of printed paper to layer under it. On the right side, I used a small brown envelope. I cut out a piece of light purple paper to layer under it, where I wrote down a short review. I layered it with some more small circles and scraps. In the little greeting card, I wrote down one of the quotes from the book that says, "Multiple belongings are nurtured by cultural encounters, but they are not only the preserve of people who travel. It is an attitude, a way of thinking, rather than the number of stamps you have on your passport. It's about thinking for yourself and your fellow human beings in more fluid terms than solid categories." The next book I read was Cecile. This is a Dutch language novel from a Belgian author. The story follows Jibril, a young boy who lives in a small village in Morocco and is the definition of curiosity and mischief. Of course, this leads him to some pretty dangerous situations, which I won't spoil. This story also centers around the search for Cecile, a Parisian woman who came to Morocco to visit and fell in love with Jibril's brother Karim. That's all I can say about the plot without giving too much away. I personally liked a combination of a very playful main character versus the very lyrical and poetic writing style. It's definitely a book I would recommend if you do speak Dutch. I wouldn't say it's a new favorite. I did think it drudged on a little bit here and there and had some issues with the storyline at times, but I do think it's a fascinating story. If you want a story that's unpredictable yet has that beautiful lyrical writing, you might really like this one. For the spread, I kept it very simple. I used watercolors to make a background using reds and oranges. I stick one of my favorite quotes on the left side on brown paper, which roughly translates to, "It's almost unfair what time does to someone. A second only lasts a second, and then it becomes part of a past you can never return to." The final book I read in March was Jade City, the first book in the Green Bone saga by Fonda Lee. I absolutely love this book. I'm not used to reading much fantasy, but lately I've been getting a ton of fantasy recommendations. I heard nothing but good things about the Green Bone trilogy, and I got started on Jade City a few times, but I had a hard time getting into it because the world building was just a little overwhelming to me as someone who doesn't read a ton of fantasy. But I decided to try again now, and I'm really glad I did because I ended up really enjoying it, and I actually already will talk about book 2 later on in this video. So the story centers mainly around the Call family, who rules one of the 2 main clans on the island of Kekon. Kekon is home to the resource of Jade. Now, only people of a certain heritage have the capacity to handle Jade, and if you're not from that heritage but use Jade, you could succumb to the itches, which is essentially you going mad. So people who can handle Jade can become Greenbones, trained Jade warriors who use Jade to enhance their strength, their agility, their senses, etc. So the 2 clans both have Greenbone warriors, but they've lived peacefully together for a long time, and they fought foreign armies together before. But tension rises, and so a potential clan war could really change things for Kekon. The story has themes of politics, but also has a magical action element to it, which to me really worked. I thought the world building and writing was really great. I love the clan politics, the bloodline hostilities, the sibling dynamics. A warning that there is a lot of violence in this book. It's not really graphic or gory, but it could be a bit much if you're not into that. I thought I would really get bored in the fight scenes the same way I get bored watching fight scenes in action movies, but actually they kept me very engaged, which was surprising. I think the writing is really great. A little more about the series in the May section of this video. For the spread, I wanted to go for all green backgrounds. I created this font that I thought suited the book, and then essentially made something that kind of looks like a book cover. In April, I read books that had been on my list for so long. First, I read The Kind Word Killing by Peter Swanson. The Kind Word Killing starts off with two POVs, Ted, who just found out that his wife has been cheating on him, and Lily, who meets Ted at an airport lounge where they're waiting for the same flight. Since they are two strangers in an airport, getting drunk on martinis while waiting for their delayed flight, they decide to overshare, since they are sure they will never see each other again. So Ted tells Lily how he found out his wife is cheating on him and jokes that he wants to kill her, to which Lily says, "I think you should do it." And from there on, we follow Ted conspiring to kill his wife with Lily as we find out more about both Ted and Lily's lives. I picked up this book because I've been trying out the thriller genre. I've read a few domestic thrillers before, but haven't been fully convinced that the genre is my thing. So this time I went for a book that came highly recommended from people who read a lot of domestic thrillers. But again, I was left a little disappointed. Not as disappointed as I felt reading The Silent Patient, but still not sure I should be reading more of these. The storyline, the twists and turns are good, and I thought the plot is well crafted, although perhaps a little predictable. It was fast-paced, it read really easily because I wanted to know how the story would unfold, so it really was a page-turner, and I read it in a couple of days. And I also like the scheming and the build-up to events, and having all these unlikable characters in the book. But that being said, I didn't feel like the different POVs had very distinct voices. I thought most of the characters relied very heavily on stereotypes, which made their actions a lot more predictable. And I think it bothered me because I've seen it done so well recently when I read The Flat Chair, and I think also just a general style of writing was something that I didn't enjoy, similar as to how I felt about The Silent Patient. So I don't really want to fully write off the genre completely, but I think I will take a little break now. I thought that I would love this genre, but so far I've been proving wrong. It will take some convincing for me to read another domestic or psychological thriller soon, because I've just been feeling pretty indifferent to all of them. But I'm still open to suggestions if you think I've just been reading the wrong ones. For the spread, I wanted to use dark red, black, and this grayish color. I really disliked the cover of this book, so I wanted to create something completely different. I drew this kind of swirl pattern on the gray paper before putting it against this dark red background on both sides. On the left side, I wrote out my review, and on the right side, I did a lettering of the title in black. Next, I read Billy Summers by Stephen King. Billy Summers, a sniper for hire, embarks on his last job, and he knows very well that in the movies, these last jobs never go as planned. Despite his high skepticism and the red flags he comes across, he still continues with the job because it pays well, and one of its requirements is that the person he kills must be a bad person, and this person is a very bad person. He's the best in his field in getting the job done and perfectly disappearing afterwards, but of course the things he's worried about going wrong, and so many more things go wrong. This was actually my first Stephen King novel, which was probably a strange one to start with. But I was trying out the thriller genre, and I must say that surprisingly, I like this type of mystery and crime thriller more. I'm not exactly sure what the subgenre would be here, but it met my expectations more than the psychological domestic thriller genre, at least with the books I've read so far. So the book is told entirely from the point of view of Billy Summers, and just to start off with the bad, I initially didn't enjoy the writing style. I did soon realize that while it's not my preferred style, it did feel like it represented Billy Summers' voice well. It did make a lot of sense in that way. So while I didn't enjoy all the references to Donald Trump or observations that were definitely offensive in some sections that I was just disgusted by ethically, it did make for a good narration. Billy Summers is an anti-hero that you get to know in depth, and I think the writing style had a large part in doing that. So I felt mixed by the writing style, but I tried to remember that it made sense. I was certainly intrigued by the plot, and it did make me want to read, but I will say that the pacing felt a little too slow for me. It lost me at times because I sometimes just not much happened for a while, and certain events felt a little bit dragged out. What I did think was interesting, and I think was a first for me, is the book within a book device, which here is used to recall Billy's past, which I thought was really interesting. The overall plotline is Billy Summers finishing up his career as a killer for hire. He was a sniper in Iraq War who after the war used his skill set to become a hitman. So he embarks on his final job, and of course everything goes wrong. We could all see that one coming, but there is no way I could have predicted the events in this book. So I really like that it kept the readers on their toes, but about what roadblocks there would be. There are some trigger warnings for violence and sexual assault. There's also some very detailed descriptions of both. There is a large trauma component in this book, also related to post-war trauma. For the spread, on the left side, I use my stamps to spell out Billy Summers all over the page. On the right side, I wrote the review on the background, and on top, I put a small watercolor background in purple and orange and drew a little forest mountain hut on top of it. Lastly, in April, I finally read Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, and of course am absolutely enchanted with it. It is so adorable and wholesome, and I have no idea how to review it because I couldn't possibly say anything negative about it. I've read all 4 by now. Of course, there's no stopping once you start, so if you have a spare afternoon, this is what you should be doing. It'll definitely make you feel all the feelings and lift up your mood. I know that I will reach for it back when I'm not feeling well or feeling a little sad or empty. It's definitely not all happy, but the approach to the heavy topics is very wholesome, which made me feel very warm inside. The characters are so precious, the relationships they build are so pure and wholesome. The storyline is so thoughtful and balances these emotional, raw moments with just pages that will make you squeal like never before. And if that wasn't enough, the illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. I enjoyed the first one, but then from the second one, I was just completely sold. Completely understand why everyone is fangirling over Heartstopper. I'm totally here for it. I also can't wait to read more of Alice Oseman's books. I wanted to do a little marathon after I finished Heartstopper, but since the Netflix show, everything is sold out and loaned out, so I'll wait my turn and then hopefully find a copy of her books sometime soon. For the spread, I just wanted to use the many memorable objects in the story and illustrations. I have the iconic leaves, some stars, and flower doodles, and a map. In May, I started off with Jade because I basically started reading the sequel straight away after Jade City. I'll keep it brief so as to not spoil it for anyone who still has to start the series, but I will say that I felt that in the second book, Fondley's writing really shone through. The world building feels less heavy at this point because a lot is already established, so I felt like I could focus on the writing more. There are some really thoughtful quotes and beautiful new favorite words that I have to make part of my vocabulary now. For the spread, I made something similar to what I did for book 1, this time with a red background and some details of white lanterns, a symbol from the books. I will likely read the final book in the trilogy in the coming months, so more on the series in my final verdict on how I'll rate it in the next few months. Finally, I read You've Reached Sam by Dustin Thau. I picked up You've Reached Sam because the description and the cover reminded me of the movie Your Name, and I thought it would have similar vibes, and it definitely did. If I had to describe it in a few words, it would be youthful melancholy and magical realism. The story starts as we find out that Sam passed away in a car crash, and we follow his girlfriend Julie as she is processing this loss. In one of the early days after he passed away, Julie calls Sam's phone, not really sure why, perhaps just to hear his voice, and to her surprise, he picks up the phone. And so this is the premise of a story about grieving for a lost one. Thinking about the book afterwards, I think it shows how grief is not a linear process, how people deal with it differently, how it's not just about moving on. And I like how the author used magical realism to show that. It was not as emotional as I expected. I thought I would be moved a bit more. Since it's a character-driven book that is really focused on the feelings and emotions of the main characters, I guess I expected to feel a lot more than I did. I think part of it was that the main character was rather unlikable, which in the beginning it didn't bother me much because I thought that this was part of the point, showing that grief can be irrational and people can act out and be angry and selfish, not because that's who they are, but because they are grieving. But even after reading most of the book, which really explores her feelings and thoughts, I couldn't quite connect to her as a main character. As for Sam, I also wish he was explored more and giving a bit more complexity. I think it would have been easier to feel attached to the characters or the relationship if the dynamic was explored more. So all that to say that I enjoyed reading it. It was a pretty fast read, but it didn't move me as much as I thought it would. I am, however, very much looking forward to reading upcoming books by Dustin Thau because I do enjoy the general atmosphere and vibe that You've Reached Sam gave off, so I'm hoping that I'll find that again in his next books. So that's a wrap for my recent reads for March, April, and May. I hope you stick around for the upcoming content that I have, some bookish vlogs, some tags, some regular reading journal videos planned. So make sure to subscribe if that sounds like something you enjoy. See you next time and hope you have a nice day.